Hi. Okay, a very good evening to all parents who are here today, okay, to find out more about the Science Olympiad itself. But of course, before I, go into the Science Olympiad and what exactly it is, okay, I think that many parents have actually reached out, okay, to our admin to actually ask a lot of questions on the Olympiad itself. So for today, okay, I'm doing another run because I want to actually see, okay, what kind of questions that you would like to ask about the Science Olympiad. And if you have any questions, right, okay, please feel free, okay, to put it into the and the questions bank itself. So from there itself, me and my colleague will actually take the questions as we are going through this particular slide itself. Yeah. So without further ado, okay, let me start on Science Olympiad lah. But before I even go into the SPSO and RSO, you all might be wondering who am I and what's my role in my stretcher itself. And basically, I'm one of those people who are helming the Science Olympiad part itself. So to give a brief background on myself itself, I've been appointed as a deputy science lead in my stretcher. But of course, my academic journey is very comparable to any student in Singapore. I was a normal neighborhood school student, okay, who went into St. Andrews Junior College. And after doing well in my A levels, I managed to go into Bachelor of Science. And then from there, I got the highest distinction. And I was also one of the valedictorians in NUS. And then from there itself, I always believed that education shouldn't be limited to your age. So from there, I decided to also divert a bit and do business administration as well, which I just recently completed. But of course, during the stint of my academic journey, I have also many awards in terms of research. So I particularly majored in microbiology, tuberculosis, and infectious disease, and also a bit on the neuropathogenesis as well. So that is my background in terms of science. And of course, in terms of research and innovation experience, I also have I've been invented a lot of drugs for hand, foot, mouth disease and Alzheimer's disease, and I've also been publicized on newspapers in terms of one of the researchers as well. And also, I went to Stanford after that to do a short stint there in terms of research projects. So whether is it local or abroad, I'm very familiar with the science curriculum and what is expected of students as they go from primary to secondary to JC itself. But of course, being familiar with the science curriculum doesn't mean that, you can actually impart your skills very well. So I also went a bit step further. So I don't know whether you're on TikTok, but most parents on TikTok should know me as Cher Sarah. And many students actually know me from their platform because I used to do a lot of live on certain explanations when it comes to physics, biology, and chemistry for students who don't really get it. And the reason why I do this is very simple. Okay, I want to actually understand what is the struggle of a science student, what concepts they cannot get, and how do I actually explain it in layman terms. And in relation to this Olympiad, this is exactly the skill set that is actually expected of students in terms of doing well in terms of the Olympiad test itself. Yeah, so both of us will be part of this program itself. Okay, so before I even start going into the program of what exactly we have for Olympiad, I think it's very important for parents to rationalize what is an Olympiad in terms of Singapore's context itself. So in terms of Singapore, there are two major Olympiads that we need to know. The first one is the SPSO, which is a very common that many parents actually know, and the second one is RSO. So for SPSO, we call it the Singapore Primary Science Olympiad. So usually this is for P5 students, and you can see, right, their purpose, based on their website, is actually to identify and nurture students with strong aptitude in science. And you can see, right, in terms of science, it doesn't only limit to a particular specialization. You have to be good at all sciences, which is biology, chemistry, and physics itself. And when I say strong aptitude, it means that the student must be able to think out of the box to solve a certain problem based on the theoretical knowledge that he has. This is what we call higher order reasoning. So for example, right, you all know that photosynthesis requires light. But the student also at the back of his mind must be able to tell me that there are other factors that can affect this as well, which can affect the outcome of photosynthesis. So that is a very brief and simple way of viewing in terms of what exactly the Olympiad is expecting of the student. Of course, those people who do very well for the SPSO, usually the top 20 will be selected for a special training program. And then after that, out of the top 20, the top 12 will represent Singapore in this thing called the International Mathematics and Science Olympiad Competition, which is the IMSO. And at that age, of course, representing Singapore in this type of competition is really very prestigious for their portfolio. So what it tests, I already mentioned higher order reasoning, but you all should know that there is also certain types of data analysis, which in terms of graphs or tables, I give some kind of real life relevant data and they must be able to make a trend or a certain type of question, which is expected in primary school syllabus as well, but it's slightly different in terms of the Olympiad. It's more higher order itself. Yeah. So for the SPSO itself is organized by the NUS High School, and I've already said that mainly it's primary 5. The registration period should be roughly going to come to an end already. And usually the school is the one that will select the students. to participate. So parents, if you strongly feel that your child is very good at science and why didn't they get an invitation to this, maybe you might want to reach out to the teachers to actually check on this as well. So for SPSO, traditionally, there are two rounds. The first round is the theory paper and the second round is the practical paper. Of course, for this year itself, okay, the format changes every year. So for this year, they are only focused on round one, which is the theory paper, which later I'll talk about. But the very good thing about SPSO is this. They're able to actually recognize, okay, a wide plethora of students based on different awards. So you can see individual awards, every Olympiad will have gold, silver, bronze, and so on and so forth. But you can see that on top of the individual awards, there are school awards and special recognition awards as well. So for school awards, you can see that basically what they do is that they take the top 5 students of each school, they add up the score, and the top 20 schools to get this, the students will get a certain certificate, which is actually a very good recognition in a sense. And also on top of that, they have this thing called the special recognition. Now, the top performing girl with a minimum silver award from each participating school will get this, okay? And this is in relation to the STEM's effort to actually increase the female cohort in terms of science because it is more male-dominated at the moment in terms of tertiary institutions, which is why, the government has decided to do this. But the point is this, there is a wide plethora, a wide variety of awards that the student can receive for SPSO. And I think that is a very good thing for parents to actually take note of. Of course, for RSO, I like to call it the silent form of Olympiad because only Raffles institution students tend to be more aware of this RSO itself. But in terms of RSO, if you really look at what they test at, they test in curiosity, logical reasoning, and interdisciplinary thinking. So for parents who are wondering, it is quite similar to SPSO. What is the main difference? The difference is this. RSO is a bit more challenging because it's very application-based. You can take a simple theory, and then it can become a very big, complex question in terms of a real-life application itself. Okay, which later I'll talk about a bit more for certain topics in terms of that. But the good thing is that the top 2 to 3% will be invited for the additional training at Raffles Institute to represent in terms of a competition. And the thing is that there is an additional domain that they tend to focus on, other than biology, chemistry, and physics. There is also the astronomy aspect that they actually should, they also, in terms of that, will actually put in their questions. So for astronomy itself, it is the study of planets and solar systems for those parents who do not know. But of course, okay, roughly, there is data interpretation, reasoning, and higher order thinking as well, which is quite similar to SPSO, but the rigor for RSO tends to be a bit more tougher because it's more real-life application-based. So for those parents who are curious about this, it's organized by Raffles Institution, but the timeline for this is slightly earlier as compared to the SPSO. So for the timeline itself, you can see that basically the registration period should be over already because the first test is around 2nd April, which later I'll talk about. So traditionally, RSO has 2 rounds. One is the theory paper, one is the practical paper. And of course, one of the smallest caveat that you want to take note is that there's only individual awards for RSO, which is gold, silver, bronze, merit, and honor certificate. Okay, on the right itself, I put up a letter here. Okay, I put it up from the online platform. So you can see that basically for students who are actually selected for Raffles Science Olympiad, the school will actually send them a letter, parents as well. And they will tell you that there is 1 round of competition or 2 rounds of competition. The school will tend to prepare them for a trial run and preparation. But the trial run is only 1 or 2 times at max only. And it's a few questions. And then after that, they are exposed to the test. To give context about the RSO, they also give the scope of the test. So you can see that number 1, it's a 1-hour MCQ. Number 2, they already warned the parents by saying that it is mostly at the lower secondary level or the O level kind of curriculum. So you can imagine how tough the questions can be. And on top of that, they are tested on general knowledge in terms of the science, which is one of the toughest things. And usually general knowledge applications usually go towards A levels and university in terms of the questions. So you can see that RSO tends to have a certain type of rigor that may be a bit lighter as compared to the SPSO itself. So yeah. So comparing the RSO and SPSO, I think the key differences is other than the organizers and in terms of RSO being more application-based and SPSO being more performance-based, the main role of SPSO is to identify 12 to 20 students who can go IMSO training and then represent themselves in that particular competition. Okay, but then for RSO's things, it's just basically a 2-round competition and it's more for building the personal portfolio to get into RI itself or the top STEM schools, which later I'll talk about. Okay, in terms of scope of topic, I've already mentioned that RSO has an additional topic that they tend to focus on, which is astronomy. But SPSO sometimes have some astronomical elements in place as well for parents to take note. And of course, SPSO has school awards. That's the idea. Okay, so now that we understand what exactly this competition are, okay, I think one of the important thing that parents need to ask, want to ask me is why do I need to sign up, okay, for my child for Science Olympiad? What exactly are the benefits? So obviously the very first benefit that I think most parents should know is about the DSA. Now, most parents are focused on the Mathematics Olympiad because it is important for DSA admission. But nowadays, okay, Mathematics Olympiad is not the only sole criteria that they look at. By participating in Science Olympiad, you're giving your child a certain kind of trump card that could actually boost them in their DSA application as well. So especially STEM schools like science and technology schools, robotic and applied science tracks or IP pathways, they tend to look at these Science Olympiad achievements. And you can see that basically like Nanyang Girls High School, ACS Independent, and I no need to say this, but Hwa Chong and RI are also part of the STEM schools that actually tend to look at this. So by doing well in Science Olympiad, it sort of gives you an edge to actually get into the top schools in terms of secondary curriculum in Singapore. Of course, the second point is that, needless to say, if a child were to get gold and silver at that age to perform at such a high vigor in terms of their Olympiad results, they definitely will be considered for secondary and junior college applications for the top schools. And usually those students that participate in Science Olympiad, they tend to represent the schools throughout their life. So in secondary schools, they will continue. In JC, they will continue. So you can see that the portfolio tends to build up to a certain level where they can use it for their career eventually. Last but not least, as mentioned in the DSA website, they always seek for holistic candidates. When I say holistic, it means that they should be all-rounder. So can you imagine, nowadays, kids, all of them are sitting for Mathematics Olympiad testers. All of them are sitting, doing quite well in their tests, and they have co-curricular activities. But of course, one standout factor that parents can actually use is definitely the Science Olympiad result, okay, to improve the competition among students so that, during the DSA application, they will take this student as having a very strong aptitude in science and other related areas. And nowadays, okay, scientific career is also on the rise in terms of that. So for parents, I think who are considering DSA, I think Science Olympiad is one of the cheat codes that you can consider to boost your child's portfolio for gaining entry into top schools. But of course, for parents who are not considering DSA, why exactly Olympiad can tend to be more important? So in terms of the question itself, of course, I would say that it is very important to develop advanced thinking skills. Now, a lot of my secondary school students, especially when I do TikTok Live, what they actually ask me is very simple. How they don't understand a certain concept. And when they don't understand a certain concept, no matter how easy or hard the question is, they cannot answer it. And that's what I call advanced thinking skills. So the very first skill set that the Olympiad builds is actually higher order reasoning. So when I talk about higher order reasoning, for those parents who are very familiar with MindStretcher's primary curriculum science, you'll realize that when we answer questions, we have answering framework. And not only in MindStretcher, in MOE schools as well, you can see that they will use the claim, evidence, and conclusion, CEC type of framework to anchor the student's answer to these things. So by memorizing the framework, the student is able to answer the question in a primary curriculum way, which is very easy, right? And we ask students to look out for state, explain, and so on and so forth. But when you go to secondary and higher order tertiary institutions, right, this type of answering technique doesn't work anymore because the questions they ask can be very broad and you have to actually really understand the underlying concept in order to fish out the information that you need to answer the question. So if you look at higher order reasoning itself, they need to have a logical and structured thinking, how to answer it step by step, rather than just memorizing the answer or just using a framework to fulfill the answer. So that is something that I think a lot of kids, and especially secondary school kids, actually lack, which I think parents can consider from building from a young age itself. The second one is, of course, needless to say, okay, science is made up of 3 specialized domains. Currently now in primary curriculum, we only look at science as a broad subject. But when a child moves from a primary to a secondary, it becomes very specialized. So the same topic can be applied in 3 different sciences in different ways. So that's why we call cross-topic application. So it moves from memorization to application already. And the worst part about secondary school curriculum is the practical. I have a lot of students that tell me that, teacher, why is it that practical is not introduced in primary school, but only introduced in secondary school? Because a lot of my students have dexterity problems. So they can't actually do the experiment through their hand skills. They don't know what to expect. They don't know what to do. So I think by allowing your child to participate in this type of Olympiad, it actually helps to actually develop their thinking skills, not only based on the theoretical aspect, but based on the practical aspect as well. Last but not least, of course, needless to say, of course, it builds the academic confidence as well. They get exposed to challenging questions. They will understand that within a certain amount of time, they need to solve a lot of questions. In primary school, usually the time is quite forgiving because we give quite a number of hours to actually solve a few questions. But in secondary school, it just goes, to show that there are many questions that the students have to actually answer within a short time frame. And that is what we call critical time skills that they need to actually solve the problem. And also, just to let parents know, over the years, right, the curriculum has been getting harder. You can see that for physics, chemistry, and biology, right, it's getting really very hard. So just a few weeks ago, I was teaching my Sec 1 and I realized that Sec 4 topics in chemistry are being brought down to Sec 1 to expose the Sec 1 to it. So in my mind, I'm wondering whether Sec 4 curriculum is going to get harder as well. So in order to prepare your kids for this hard curriculum, developing these advanced thinking skills will go a long way, not only just limited from primary to secondary, but also to JC and tertiary institutions as well. So that is the important thing that parents should take note. But of course, okay, on top of that, okay, I think it's also to prepare your child for the secondary school rigor. So a child takes about 4 to 5 subjects in primary school, but when you go to secondary school, it becomes 8 to 9 subjects. And I can tell you that the depth of each subject becomes very deep, such that the students will get overwhelmed by the amount of work that they need to do, the amount of revision that they need to do, and so on. So by enrolling in this Olympiad earlier, you're bridging the gap that is needed for the science domains, especially biology, chemistry, and physics. And by fulfilling this, you are already fulfilling 2 subjects out of 9 or 3 subjects out of 9, which gives a big win, okay, to a student at a primary 5, okay, and when he goes to Sec 1 or Sec 2 or even Sec 4, they will actually perform much better as compared to their peers. So to understand this secondary school jump, let me show you a question, okay? So many primary school students are very familiar with the WCLC concept. You all can ask your kids, they will definitely know this diagram. You all can look at your worksheets. This diagram will definitely be there. So what's happening here is very simple. In a primary school aspect, the groundwater gains heat, evaporates, form water vapor. The water vapor touches the cooler surface of the plastic sheet, condenses, and you will get pure water in the cup itself. So that is how we actually allow the primary school students to explain. And you can see it's an answering framework. That's why we call WCLC. Easy to remember. And when you remember the acronym, it's easy to answer the question when you see this question, right? It's not really application-based. But this same question in secondary school becomes a huge jump. Number one, you see that that whole natural concept here has been changed to become an experimental concept. And the problem with experimental concept is, number one, you need to know the apparatus to do the experiment. You need to know how to draw the apparatus, label the apparatus, and worst come to worst, the explanation for this whole diagram changes, and you need to know the caveats of each of the instrument that you use. So for example, I can give you an example. In secondary school, when I teach this subject, I will always tell them to put boiling chip into the solution because it ensures that the solution, as it's heating up, there is an even heating within the system itself. As compared to your primary school, the sun heats up the water, but they don't need to know it's even heating. But down here, they need to know that there is even heating for the secondary school curriculum, which we call smooth boiling. So you can see a simple question like this is now becoming a simple distillation setup in secondary school. This is just one small topic, parents. So if you think about it, if I were to sum up the whole topic of the secondary school syllabus, you can imagine how challenging it is for a child to actually, grasp all this science knowledge and itself. And in fact, a lot of my primary school students, when they go to secondary school, especially in math and science, they tend to actually struggle a bit because the focus changes. The focus is more on critical thinking, more on algebra, more on practical aspect. So this is the problem of secondary school and primary school. So a student that does very well in primary school might not necessarily do well in secondary school and vice versa. So this is something that I think parents should actually take note. And that's why the Olympiad actually helps to bridge this gap, which I think is really very important. And it's easy to actually, expose a younger child to these concepts because they can absorb much more efficiently as compared to, in secondary school when they have too much things going on. So that's the thing. Okay. Once we understand, okay, what exactly this Olympiad is used for, I think I will go through the competition format, which most parents are interested in. So for SPSO, this year there is only round 1. It is conducted online. There is 40 MCQ questions. But the problem is this, a lot of parents think MCQ question is very easy, but I suggest you all should go and try it because section A is the normal type of MCQ. For 30 MCQs, you choose an option, okay, for the question. So it's very similar to the primary school curriculum where you just choose one option and then you move on. But there's this thing called section B. So for section B, they have 10 MCQs, but the problem is this. These 10 MCQs have 3 statements. So they have to view 30 statements and decide whether each statement is true or false. So you can imagine the amount of time that they have to do this is very hard at such a young age at primary 5. So that's why Olympiad is very good portfolio for primary school students because it's really quite hard to do it. It's very time pressurizing and so on and so forth. And you can see, for example, here, if your 10 MCQs, if let's say your 3 statements are actually correct, then you will straight away know that to choose option A. Then you move on to the next question. Okay, so the duration is 45 minutes, and for this year is 19 minute 2026 lah. And by now you all should have received the letters if your child is inside this program. Okay, but of course, okay, for those people who are in primary 4 who are going towards primary 5, okay, I just bring in round 2 because every year, okay, the format of SPSO actually changes. So for round 2 itself, there is the practical round, and only the top 50 or 1.5% of participants, whichever is lower, will actually get entered into this round now. And you can see it's a hands-on practical paper and it's 120 minutes. Let me tell you, for O-level practical, right, the timeline is actually 1 hour 50 minutes. This is 2 hours. So you can imagine the amount of rigor is about the same as compared to O-level practical itself. So I would say that it's quite tough in terms of SPSO. Okay, but just take note, for this year itself, practical round is not conducted. So it's like, I would say it's like it's a good thing for most students because it's easy to get the certificate and the award because it's just based on round 1. Of course, in terms of what is tested, all 3 sciences are tested. Okay, SPSO, most of the time they go towards data analysis because that's the way that they can make the test tougher as compared to the normal school curriculum. Okay, and usually for a student to do well in SPSO, they need to be very solid in terms of their physics, chemistry, and bio. These 3, they have to be really very strong in order to do well. Yeah, so later I'll show you some sample questions so you understand what exactly SPSO is actually entails. Okay, next one is RSO. For RSO, this year there is round 1 and round 2. For round 1, there's 30 MCQs. Okay, although this seems easier, okay, because you got 2 minutes per MCQ because the test is 60 minutes and the test is on 2nd of April. The thing is this, you must remember that RSO is very heavy application-based type of question. So 2 minutes per question is not even enough to actually solve. Usually, you will take about 2.5 minutes if you are a primary 5 student. So you can imagine it is very, very hard to finish the test on time. That's one thing that parents should take note. But of course, round 2 is for those people, the top 2 to 3% that actually enters, okay, into this round 2. They will have a hands-on practical paper, which is also 2 hours, and it's very similar to the SPSO as well. And this year, the date has been fixed for both tests, 2nd April and 30th April, for those parents who want to take note. Okay, now the extra module that RSO tends to focus on tends to be a bit more physics-based, which is astronomy. But as I said just now, SPSO also have a bit of astronomical kind of things. And let me remind parents, both tests are actually, although it seems very similar, one is very application-based, real-world context-based. Another one is really based on practical type of questions. So it is very, very different, but the rigor is roughly the same. So that is something that parents should actually know in terms of the format. Okay, so I'm going to spend some time here because I think it is very crucial for parents and kids with you all to know what exactly Olympiad questions actually entail. And for kids who are here with your parents, you can also try to answer these questions. So let me give an example of a biology question. So in this biology question itself, okay, let me actually turn on my highlighter so that you all can see. So in this biology question itself, what you can actually see is that basically they soak the eggs for a few days in this thing called a concentrated salt solution. Okay, so for those parents who don't know, okay, concentrated salt solution, by soaking something in, the salt enter the eggs, and basically the eggs will start to turn salty. Okay, so they will ask this type of question where which one will actually explain this particular phenomenon, and you need to pick which one is actually correct. So in this case, okay, of course, the salt particles move into the eggs because the eggs became very salty. That's definitely correct. Okay, and there's this process called active transport. Now, for those of you who don't know what exactly this is talking about, if you look at my diagram here, okay, the salt can actually go from a higher concentration to a lower concentration. And this is what we traditionally call as diffusion, which Set 1 students are actually exposed to. Okay, so, but the problem is this, active transport is a process that requires energy. But diffusion is a process that does not require energy. That's why number 2 is definitely out in terms of the answer. So that is why, okay, this thing tends to be a bit tricky because you can see that diffusion is a Set 1 concept. Active transport is a Set 3 concept. And at P5, the students are supposed to know these 2 concepts in order to answer the question. Okay. Third thing is that, of course, in terms of the salt solution, you'll realize that it has higher concentration than the contents. And this is true because in order to go from outside to inside, okay, there needs to be a higher concentration to a lower concentration itself. So that is the idea of this thing that parents need to know lah. Okay. Next thing is, of course, the shell and the membrane of the eggs were permeable to the salt particles. This is true because for diffusion to happen, the egg barrier must allow the salt to actually move into the egg. So if you think about it, the answer is definitely 1, 3, and 4, which is definitely C, because 2 is definitely wrong. So this, you see, right? Okay, when I explain it, okay, it tends to seem I have already distilled it to a very layman term for parents and students to understand. But actually, the concepts that they are testing here tends to be very, very enormous. Okay, there's a lot of things to understand even before you can answer this question. So it's not easy to actually guess the question answer even. So parents can actually take note of this. Of course, the second type of question is what we call on cell parts, which is quite popular in SPSO because now for primary 6 science, they have removed cell parts. So if you ask a primary 6 student previously who have just entered secondary 1, they will know this by now. But for those P5 and P6 currently, they are not exposed to this topic. So of course, this question is asking you which part of a plant cell will turn blue back after iodine solution is added. You can see that there is a lot of things that the student need to know. First thing, they must know what each part actually does. Second thing, once they know what each part actually does, they must also understand what does iodine solution do. So for parents who don't know, iodine solution tests for starch, and starch is normally synthesized by your chloroplast because it absorbs light and so on to allow for photosynthesis to happen. So you can see that basically, number one, they need to know all the different functions of nucleus, vacuole, mitochondria, and chloroplast. Second thing, using this information, they must know that what the test is testing for in order to actually round down that, oh, chloroplast is indeed the correct answer. So you can see, right, again, I have put up these things here, but these are very basic explanations. A lot of concept-based thinking comes into play, and a lot of practical type of knowledge comes into play when it comes to answering this type of topics. So that's something that I wanted to highlight. Okay, third one is, of course, we move on to chemistry itself. When we talk about chemistry, they always like to tackle apparatus, especially because apparatus is something that P5 students don't really have access to and they don't really know. Okay, so to give parents a brief kind of an overview, right? Okay, you can actually see that for this one, okay, this particular thing and this one, this is called a pipette and a burette. And a pipette and burette, right, usually they are tested only in secondary 3. And you can see that this is already tested in P5 already. Okay, this is a measuring cylinder, which they will actually test in what they call set 1. Okay, so which apparatus can measure 22.90? If you give a set 3 or a set 4 student this question, they will immediately be able to tell me that there's only one answer for this, and the answer is 2. Okay, but for primary school students, how do we tackle this? Number one, we tell them to actually look out for the markings. If you can see in this 2 part here, you can see that there are markings on this measuring cylinder and the burette. This actually tells you that it can measure to a very small interval. Whereas for this, you only can measure 25 milliliter, right? So you know that that is definitely out. Then between 2 and 3, this is where you need to have additional context here. The burette is the one that can measure to 2 decimal place because of its precision. But for measuring cylinder, the precision tends to be 0.5. So that's why they cannot measure this. This one needs a bit of background knowledge. So that's why, okay, you can see that basically the answer will straight away be only 2. But I can tell you that most students using my way, which is looking at the markings itself, they tend to select 2 and 3. Okay, and in fact, many students did select that because they thought that, oh, that's the way to answer the question. But actually, no, you need the secondary school knowledge in order to answer that question. So you can see chemistry tends to be a bit tricky when it comes to the apparatus. Okay, chemistry question 2 is even harder. Okay, now as I said, okay, this whole concept is being brought down from Sec 4 to Sec 1. So for parents who don't know, this is called fractional distillation or simple distillation. So the idea of simple distillation is to get pure substances, okay, Y and Z, okay, pure substances from the compound itself. So you can see in this question, right, I'm making compound X from Y and Z. Okay, so by heating compound Y and Z, I can get X. But the problem is this reaction can only occur if they stay in the liquid phase. But if they don't stay in the liquid phase and they become gas, because you're heating it, right, there's a chance that it's going to become gas very easily. So when it becomes gas, then you cannot form X anymore. So what is the purpose of the condenser? Very simple. As the name suggests, condenser is to condense something, right? So it's quite simple. It's to actually condense. As your vapor of Y and Z go up onto the condenser, what happens is that it will condense and bring back down your Y and Z so that you don't lose any Y and Z when the reaction is going on. And by bringing back them into the liquid phase, you can easily see that basically, okay, they can react back to form the X. So straight away, you know the answer is actually A. Okay, so that's why, okay, again, this one needs a lot of contextual knowledge, but you can see I've already sort of made it into very layman term here so that the student can actually a bit understand. So we are looking at how to look at contextual clues, like word of condenser, how would you use it? What is going on? And you can see that it's very application-based because if you don't know what's going on, you cannot answer the question. Okay. Next one is physics. I think physics, okay, tends to be a bit more tougher, okay, especially in RSO and SPSO because there is a lot of concept of physics that students are not exposed to at P5 and P6 level. So one of the biggest concepts that Sec 3 and Sec 4, they actually start off with physics is called kinematics. And this thing is called displacement and velocity itself. So you can see I give you a time here, right? This actually maps the velocity against time. So when we talk about velocity against time, you can see that for the first phase itself, the car is actually traveling at a very constant speed. Okay, so for example, you can think of this as this. For those people, parents who drive car, it's quite simple, right? If let's say you travel 60 kilometer an hour, that means 1 hour you travel 60 kilometer. The next hour you will also travel another 60 kilometer. And the next hour also another 60 kilometers. So you can see that the distance that they travel is going to be the same. So when I plot in terms of distance or displacement against time, you will see that from your original position, you will actually travel, right? But it tends to be constant. Okay, so this straight line here indicates that you're increasing, okay, every time point equally. So 60 kilometer for 1 hour, 120 for 2 hours, and so on and so forth. Then the next phase is this part here, okay, where you start to see suddenly velocity increase. So for those parents who don't know, this is called acceleration, okay? So acceleration is just basically telling you that now, the first hour, I drive at 60 kilometers per hour. Second hour, I suddenly increase to 80. The next hour, I suddenly increase to 100. So if you can think very logically, by increasing the speed and velocity, I'm actually covering a lot of distance over the same period of time. So obviously, your distance is going to increase, but it's not going to increase in a straight line because it's not going to be proportional. So this is what we call increasing distance over time. Because as you increase the speed, the distance that you cover based on the gradient is going to be further. That's why the answer is straight away A. Okay, but of course, as I said, at P5, a lot of students in science struggle with graph data and table data. Simple questions like drawing the graph and trend, they really don't understand. So can you imagine, this is actually quite a tough question for a Sec 3 student already. So that's what I wanted to put out, okay, in terms of physics itself. Okay, the last one, this one is quite easy. Okay, as long as you know the formula that force equals to mass times acceleration, you can just plug in the formula of force and mass to find your acceleration. This is quite easy. This is simple math. But in order for a student to do this, they must know the formula. And the biggest thing is, the problem is the assumption. So in this diagram, right, the problem is, in physics, I did not account for the friction that is on the surface. So the key thing that you need to understand, okay, is basically there is no friction, right? So because there is no friction, okay, that's why this formula is actually possible. But if let's say suddenly I tell the parents that, there is 2 newtons, okay, of friction here, then the formula changes because instead of 20, it becomes 18 now. And then the whole thing changes. So that's why for this thing, the biggest assumption is that now I'm pushing this particular block in terms of a smooth block. And that is the interesting thing about this. So that's why, okay, it is a very tough question. And many students could not answer this in P5 lah, because number one, they don't know how to use the formula. Number two, if you're not good at math, then naturally you won't remember formulas and it's very hard to actually answer these questions. So I think these are the type of questions that, that parents, I've shown you all in terms of Olympiad question. So you all can take note of this. You all can see number one is very tough. Number two is very application based, real life context based, and you need to know a lot of assumptions when it comes to this type of questions. So that's what I wanted to actually show. Okay, with that, of course, moving on onto the topics that are covered in SPSO and RSO, you can see that there are a variety of topics that are covered. Okay, so the good thing about these topics is that number one, in terms of biology, most of the topics that you see, photosynthesis, respiration, energy flow, these three are roughly covered in primary school already. Okay, and human impact also. Okay, but for secondary school, the rest are actually covered. So you can see that there is 4 topics in biology that tends to be of primary school syllabus, but the rest tends to be more secondary school driven. Okay, for physics, I can tell you the only thing that students actually learn about is light. Okay, the rest, right, is very, very secondary school. Even density also, they don't learn it in primary school itself. So that is, you can see that, that's why I say that the physics component of RSOs or Science Olympiad tend to be a bit tougher because a lot of concepts, they have to understand at such a young age. And it's not very easy to, bring it to layman terms for these students itself. Okay, the next thing is, of course, for chemistry, okay, the good news is atomic structure and kinetic particle theory are something that students have to be familiar with because for P5 students, they have already learned what is matter. So they will know that matter is actually something that has mass and occupies space. And then from there, I can build on in terms of atoms and build on in terms of kinetic particle theory. So this one is quite easy. But you can see chemical bonding, chemical reaction, energy changes. These three, even my Sec 3 and Sec 4 actually struggle with. So can you imagine by exposing it to P5, it can be quite intimidating for them, but it's a very good exposure in terms of that. And of course, astronomy tends to study in terms of solar system and all. Down here, I've written that it is in RSO, but I want to highlight to parents is that recently, right, okay, they have actually also tested some astronomy topics in science SPSO as well. Okay, so this is something that, okay, parents should actually take note as well. So you can see for the underlying topics, these are topics that students have rough background in, which is easy to build their foundations in. But of course, you can see that there's a plethora or myriad of topics that actually tends to be more secondary school JC type of syllabus, which they need to understand at such a young age. But the interesting thing is this. Most students told me that biology is the hardest. And the reason is simple, because number one is content heavy, number two is very application based. So by memorizing a certain topic, it's not easy to answer that question. So that's why I wanted to actually highlight here in terms of the Science Olympiad. And of course, in terms of distribution of topics, you can see that it tends to be more physics focused, but this is just purely based on the number of topics of what is given in the previous slide. Okay, next thing. Okay, now that you all know what is Science Olympiad and what exactly it is about and what is the rigor, you all have seen the type of questions, you all are mentally now can be Olympiad experts already. So the thing now is, how at MindStretcher we plan to actually prepare them for this particular Olympiad challenge. So to understand this, right, I think we need to understand where students struggle, what are their pain points, and then we plug that gap. So in terms of biology, the most common issue that students have told me is that they tend to memorize processes. So whenever a question asks us about photosynthesis, they straight away write whatever, they vomit out or they regurgitate whatever they memorize. Okay, but okay, you cannot answer that way. By answering that way, you will get a few marks, but you won't be able to score that marks. That's the first thing. Okay. Second thing, in terms of chemistry, I think the biggest point with chemistry is that a lot of students, they cannot visualize what is going on. So for example, in chemistry, right, a very simple theory is that when I heat particles, particles tend to spread out. And when they spread out, naturally the volume that they occupy is going to be bigger as compared to just now. Okay, but most students actually struggle with this simple concept because they cannot visualize. They cannot tell me that, oh, by heating particles, they will actually move. So you can see that that simple knowledge point is actually missing. So if they were to draw it through visualization, it's easier to understand. Of course, the next one for physics, I would say that physics is the easiest to study, but it's the hardest to score. Because by memorizing formulas, it doesn't help you. Like for example, just now, force equals to mass times acceleration. But you can only apply this formula if there is no friction, for example. Or you must know where the friction is acting against. So this is where students actually struggle. And for chemistry and physics, I always encourage students to do visual drawings before they even tackle the question. And highlight what are the important points that they need to know from the question itself. Last but not least, of course, there's the astronomy, which is more like, why the eclipse actually forms and so on and so forth. And there were students that actually tell me that eclipse can form every year. Actually, that's not true because there's a certain orbital arrangement where it needs to actually take place in order for the eclipse to actually form. So the thing is that how do we then plug these gaps? So the very first thing is that for biology, I always tell my students to think of the bigger picture. Don't just narrow yourself down to photosynthesis, but rather think, by affecting photosynthesis, what are the different factors that affect photosynthesis? And did the question mention about that? If the question never mentioned about that, then you cannot assume that it's not there. You need to mention it in your answers. And by changing photosynthesis, would it affect the plant? Will the plant grow better? Or is it because like by putting a plant in too much light, what's going to happen? Will it wilt? So these are things that we actually train students in terms of the bigger picture rather than just, being very narrow-minded, which is very, very, I would say, primary school syllabus lah. Okay, but for secondary school, we need to think bigger. Next one is for chemistry itself, okay, in terms of particle diagram, like what I said, if a student were to draw a particle diagram, he can visualize that the particles are moving apart and therefore telling me that the volume increases. For physics, the main thing that I always tell them is that every formula that they use, there is always an assumption that the student needs to know. If they don't remember the assumption and they apply the formula, they're going to be in deep trouble. And that is why, okay, I always tell them to draw the diagram based on the question, and then from there, apply the assumptions from there. Last but not least, for astronomy, I think for astronomy, the thing is that you need a very strong physics base. So naturally, meaning that you should be able to know which formula to use. Visual spatialization has to be very good as well. So in other words, okay, to put everything in a nutshell, how do we train students for Olympiad is very simple. Get them to think of bigger picture, get them to think of real life applications, and last but not least, make them understand the concept rather than memorizing and regurgitating them every single time. And this is what I do with my secondary school students as well. Okay, so of course, okay, in order to do well, we have actually done something called concept layering, and concept layering is actually very, very evident in most of our worksheets as well. So what we actually train students to do is that after we expose them to a certain concept, we train them from foundation to applied reasoning. So when we talk about foundation, it's just basic, very theoretical questions. Okay, what does photosynthesis need? When carbon dioxide changes, how does photosynthesis change? Very basic questions. Next step, we layer this into difficulty level. Next step is, by keeping carbon dioxide constant, what are other factors that could affect this? And by increasing carbon dioxide, does it mean that photosynthesis will increase forever? Last but not least is integration. Now, if you manage to actually go for integration or master integration, that means your concept is very strong. And this usually, those people who are very good at Olympiad, they get gold and silver, right? It's because their integration is very good. They're able to actually tell me how multiple systems can work together, okay, in order to produce an outcome. So for example, down here, respiration, okay, you can see that if I breathe in lesser, okay, it will definitely affect the diffusion of oxygen into my lungs, and therefore I'll have lesser oxygen in the body and I might faint. Okay, so that is certain things that students should actually know, and this is what we call layering of foundations all the way down to integration itself. So in Olympiad, me and Jervis have actually realized that for Olympiad topic progression, there is a certain way to actually do it. We always start off with foundational topics that the student is already aware of in terms of the primary 5 syllabus, like physiology in terms of photosynthesis and respiration, matter and atomic structures such as kinetic particle theories. These are already things that students already know at P5, and we can build on that concept. After that, what we do is that we start going a bit harder in terms of introducing them new concepts and doing foundation and layering. Like for example, thermal energy and work and power, and how does it affect electricity and all these things. Next thing, of course, we go into the harder topics, which is mechanics. And as I said, for physics, mechanics is very hard. For parents who don't know what is mechanics, mechanics is just basically moment. Okay, how does a force, okay, change acceleration, for example, or how does a force cause a turning effect? So these are what we call mechanics. And then last but not least is integrated science. Now, integrated science tend to be a bit more bio-heavy because it's very content-heavy, and you can see that there are certain standout topics that are really very hard to score in, especially human anatomy, because there are many parts that you need to remember in terms of the function. In terms of ecology and energy flow, is more of globalization. Okay, how does globalization affect the energy flow in Earth, and does it cause pollution? What is the human impact, and so on and so forth. So you can see that for Olympiad topic progression, me and Jarvis actually feel that the way to do it is to go from simpler topics to tougher topics, and we layer as we go, and we fill the gaps for every student as we go. So that's how we actually think that this is a way to actually conquer your Olympiad itself. So in this sense, of course, we have an Olympiad program that is going to be coming up. But of course, I just wanted to show you all what we have for our Olympiad before even going into the program itself. So you can see that basically for the Olympiad, we have 3 sections. The first section is the concept mind map. The second section is the progressive practice question. And the third section is the supplementary notes. So let me show you all an example, okay, of what the notes actually look like. So very first part, I will actually share the supplementary notes, okay, for parents to actually take a look at this. So I hope that you all can see my screen now. Okay, I'm sharing the supplementary notes. So this is the first topic, which is respiration in humans. So as I said just now, the first topic is respiration and photosynthesis, and this is just part of the notes. I won't be sharing the whole notes here because I don't want to actually share everything out here. Okay, so the idea is that this is the first part of the notes. You can clearly see that number one, we have already put what are the intended lesson outcomes, okay, in terms of what the students should expect in Olympiad. So for example, in respiration, first thing, you must know your definitions. Second thing, you must know your systems. Third thing, how does it relate to diseases? That is the three things that they need to know. So if you can look in the notes itself, is very, very intensive. You can see that just this topic itself, let me zoom in. You can see it's already 30 pages. Okay, and you can see that we first start building upon what students already know, which is respiration, certain definitions, and so on and so forth. Okay, of course, if I ask a P5 student, okay, what they know about respiration, they confirm will tell me this thing, which is very standard, which is basically respiration is actually the breakdown of glucose in the body or sugar in the body to produce energy. But on top of that, we are going to teach them even more stuff like aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration, which some parents might be familiar with. Okay, those parents that like to gym a lot, you'll realize that you do two forms of respiration. Aerobic respiration is something that happens every single day that you're doing normally. But anaerobic respiration is something that only happens when you strain your body, when you don't have enough oxygen. That's where, you start to do this type of respiration. But the caveat of this is that you'll build up lactic acid in the body. And that's why next day your muscles tend to be pain and it takes a while to go away because I need oxygen to solve the problem. So these are things that, that we actually introduced to these students. And you can see that I've bolded all these keywords because I think that it's important for a student to take note as they are reading this particular notes itself. But on top of that, after every single point that is being covered, I have a concept checkpoint question, which is very similar to the SPSO and RSO standard. So I give them what is the correct answer. I also tell them why exactly it is wrong and why exactly it is correct. So these are things that students can use to actually check their knowledge as they are reading through. Okay. On top of that, I have also included certain topics that I feel that there might be a chance that could be tested in SPSO and RSO, but haven't come out yet. So for example, carbonic anhydrase is more of a O-level type of set 4 bio topic, whereby you must remember that carbonic anhydrase is something that maintains the carbon dioxide concentration in the blood. Without this, okay, you will get too acidic and you'll probably die or faint and so on and so forth. So these are things that, we expose out of the syllabus for students to take note as well. And you can see, as usual, there's again a concept question that is tested again. But notice the concept question. The concept question now is very, very activity-based or real-life application-based. You can see that the student is walking slowly for 10 minutes. The student is sprinting, and then I tell them what is actually happening, what accounts for this observation. So it's more like looking at the symptoms and diagnosing what is wrong. And in order to do that, you got to get your basic right first. So that is how we actually stretch the students' knowledge when it comes to this type of things. And of course, once they understand the definition, that is more of the application in terms of, the human physiology itself. What are the parts, the different parts that actually conduct in terms of human respiration? What are the important points that they need to take note of? So for example, okay, cilia is one of the important organs that I think students should know. And the reason is very simple. Without cilia, we will have mucus keep accumulating in the body. So for older people, you will keep coughing your mucus out because it blocks your thing, right? But for younger people itself, this cilia tends to be more functional. These are like brush type that is actually along your windpipe. So what's going to happen is that it's going to brush off your mucus as you're actually talking, so you don't need to cough. But for some of them, because the mucus tends to build up too much, the cilia cannot function that well. So the idea is that they cough to clear the phlegm. So that is the interesting thing about trachea itself. And you can see again, I've put a data analysis type of question here for students to actually apply and see what is actually correct or wrong. So you can see my question actually goes from definition, okay, to application to data analysis. And that's what actually SPSO and RSO is about. Okay, and of course, to top it off, okay, I also go in depth into certain breathing mechanisms that they need to know. Like for example, in the elderly, what is actually happening? How does oxygen actually exchange with carbon dioxide? And in fact, okay, for those students who are very interested in how secondary school questions look like, I've included this Let's Discuss topic here as well, for students to gain exposure. Okay, how does a section B question actually look like? What is the keywords they need to take note when they're answering this type of questions? And this type of question also come out in A level, so it's very, very similar. Okay, on top of that, okay, all these questions, I've also included tables that makes it easier for a student to actually revise the tables and understand the concepts as well. And of course, last but not least, of course, after doing all this, we have real life applications here, which is the effect of smoke on health. So once you know respiration is very important for health, what happens if the respiration is being inhibited or torpedoed by this particular tobacco smoke itself? What is going to happen? Okay, what are the type of pollutants that we should avoid in order to keep respiration normal in our body? And of course, the linked diseases that is important as well. So a lot of doctors actually, they feel that chronic bronchitis and emphysema is the same thing, but the way that they originate tends to be a bit different. Emphysema can become a chronic bronchitis itself. So for those who don't know what's the word chronic, it means that it's lifetime. So that is the interesting thing about these things that students will already learn from P5. And from there, when they build this type of knowledge at such a young age, it goes a long way. Last but not least, okay, for those parents who are participating in RSO and those P4 students who are enrolling into this, okay, you will get exposure to experiments in terms of how to study respiration and what are the things that you need to look out for and what are the question types that they need to look out for in terms of this. So you can see that in terms of these notes, I would say that it's quite a lot, okay, when it comes to this. That's why we call this the supplementary notes. These are notes that are used for the student, created for the student to be used on top of the lesson that they will go for in terms of the Olympiad program. Okay, other than the supplementary itself, of course, another important thing, okay, that parents might feel is that this is actually too much information, right? So of course, to distill down the information, what we have actually done is we have done a concept paper. So for parents who do not know, in terms of the concept paper itself, okay, you can see that for the concept paper, it's just a 10-page concept paper. And you can see for the concept paper, it's very simple. It's just basically fill in the blanks. So what students need to do is that as we are going through the program, we will actually tell them in a nutshell, what are the things that they need to remember in terms of definition and in terms of table-wise, okay, what are the summarized information that they need to know about aerobic and anaerobic respiration. And then from there, okay, you can see that we start labeling structures in terms of the respiratory system and what are certain adaptations that, like just now, this diagram that I showed, last surface area to volume ratio and so on and so forth. These are things that students should take note of for their SPSO and how in terms of breathing mechanism and so on and so forth. So to keep it very simple, this concept paper is a summarized version of the supplementary lesson notes, which we will go through during the program, and students can actually take notes and we will build on their, what they call the information that they need to score well in terms of SPSO. And in order to even stretch students, what I've included here is, of course, optional challenges. Okay, these are like section B type of questions. So if a student is able to answer this type of question, usually he will do well in terms of the concept basis for SPSO and RSO itself. Okay, so for parents who still feel that this concept paper is a bit too much, okay, I have even went further, me and Jarvis have even went further to create something called the mind maps. So you can see in my screen itself, this is a typical mind map for just one of the topic. And you can see for students who are taking SPSO and RSO, you can easily just look at this mind map, take note of the key points, and go for your test. That will actually save you a lot of time so that when you all look at this, you can even use this as a reference point as you're doing the questions to see what are the things that are important to take note. And I'm pretty sure this mind map is actually quite good because we already summarized every single thing in this particular diagram itself. And I think this mind map is the big factor that a lot of students should go for, because you can see that I have already mapped out everything. Like respiration, there's aerobic and anaerobic. What are the definitions? What are the formulas? What are the reactions that they need to remember? Second thing is, what is the process that they need to remember and how this process takes place? What is the adaptations that happen in order for this breathing process to take place? Okay. Last but not least, I've also summarized the diseases here and what are the pollutants that can cause different diseases and what they need to take note. So you can see there is a three-pronged approach when it comes to our Olympiad system. First thing, I give the student the maximum amount of notes, okay, that they need to know. Second thing is that in class, we will go through a summarized version of the note that the student needs to know in order to answer a certain question. Third step, we top it up by giving them the mind map so that during a test itself, okay, if they don't have time to look at the notes, they don't have time to look at the concept paper, at least they can look at this, roughly get the idea of that topic, go for the test. Any question that comes out, they are able to answer. So these are the key things that we actually do, okay, for this particular program itself. Okay, of course, last but not least, okay, we also have Olympiad questions, okay, about 40 to 50 Olympiad questions in terms of the format. And you can see that basically in terms of questions, there are two sections that parents need to take note. The first one is very SPSO format. So the first one is the 30 to 35 MCQs, which parents need to take note. And you can see that for the first question is a data type of question. And in this particular part, I've gone through why is it correct, why is it wrong, and so on and so forth. And again, second question and third question and so on and so forth. For section B itself, of course, you can see that I've also created section B question, but section B question will be slightly lesser because in the test, there's only 10 MCQs that are tested, right? But in section B itself, we create about 10 to 15 questions to expose these students and reminder, they need to look at all three statements before they select a certain option. So for example, in this case, I will give them a scenario and there are three statements that a scientist has evaluated. Which one is correct? And in this case, there's only two statements that are correct, so they need to choose B. So these are things that we actually do. And in terms of the Olympiad question sample, okay, Jervis has actually worked on it very well. And I must say that basically the question really very comparable to the Olympiad questions itself. So you don't need to worry in terms of the regard, in terms of the academic rigor and the syllabus that is given out. And in terms of notes-wise, I think even if for parents who are not participating in Olympiad, by exposing yourself to all these, the notes can be reused in secondary school, which we will probably be using as well. And you can see some notes are not even available at MindStretcher yet. For example, biology notes are not available at MindStretcher, but in this program, we are giving it up. Okay, so these are things that parents should take note, okay, before you all go into this program, what are the benefits and so on and so forth. So these are things that we have roughly created on our site, okay, in terms of the notes and everything. Okay, so let me go back to the slide. Okay, so this is something that I already went through, and you can see that our notes have that certain rigor to help students to build it up. Okay, so next part is, of course, moving on. Wait, give me a moment. Yeah. Okay, so next part is just to introduce our Olympiad program overview, okay, that we have. So the very first thing is number one, okay, we have two types of sessions that are going. Okay, but to give you a program overview, it is modeled under the SPSO competition. RSO participants are also welcome, but I know that the time frame for RSO tends to be a bit shorter. But what we have done on our side is that we have tried to anchor certain topics at the front, okay, so that, RSO participants tend to benefit a bit more. And second thing, okay, by participating in this, you get the notes, you get the mind map. So it's quite a good win for these students, even though the time frame is a bit short and so on. So there's 10 sessions, 2 hours, and it's about $550. There are two types of session. The first one is physical, that will happen at Toa Payoh Central Campus from 8:45 to 10:45 a.m. on Saturdays. And the second one is online, which is Sundays, okay, from 4:30 to 6:30 p.m. Of course, there are certain exceptions, okay, for Hari Raya Puasa, it falls on a Saturday, so that session will move to a Sunday. And for the last session on 16 May, okay, we will move it to a Saturday as well. And the reason is simple, because at the end of this whole program, we have bonus Olympiad test, SPSO format type of test for students to take note. But this one will only be done as a physical session. It will not be done as an online session, and you can choose between two slots. So during each session, what we actually plan to do is that we plan to do a 1 hour, 15 minutes mock paper, and 45 minutes, we will discuss the answer. We will also give the answer sheets for the students as well, for them to take note. Okay, so of course, the trainers will be me and Jervis, myself, and this is actually a good team, I feel, in order to train Olympiad, because for me itself, I'm very aware of the secondary and A-level syllabus. And for Jarvis, he's also very aware of the secondary A-level syllabus, and he himself has actually participated in Olympiad, so he knows what is expected as well. Okay, so in terms of the programs wise and what is the focus topics, I've already mapped out the dates here and what are the key skills and what we are going for. So you can see that we start off with the simple topics and we end off with the tougher topics itself. So that is something that I want to actually highlight to parents, and it's a 10-week ongoing program in terms of the online and the physical. So yeah, so I think I would actually pause here okay, for the presentation itself. I know it's slightly earlier than time, but I wanted to give more time to questions that parents actually have. So let me just see whether you all have any questions that you all want to actually ask. I see a few questions in the chat. Okay, so the first one, okay, in terms of slides wise, I think the slides wise already has been answered. Okay, the second one is if we signed up for online, will the materials be sent to us? Yes. Okay, usually for online itself, what we do is that you need to collect the materials in the center upfront before you go for the online session lah, to answer definitely itself. Yeah. So let me see whether there are any other questions. Okay, down here. Okay, so parents, you all can feel free to ask questions itself. Okay, don't be shy and please ask more questions itself. So Karthik has actually asked a question, is this open for P5 and P6 students only or also P4? Or is it too early for P4 to go for this? So I had a few inquiries this morning from part-time and full-time teachers whose parents actually asked them about this program and they want to enroll them, but they are at P4. Me and Jervis actually discussed this and we realized that actually P4 is actually quite a good age to actually gain entry into the program lah. So I think they have 1 year of time to actually build up on all this. So by going for this 10-year course, 10-week course itself, they can actually build up on their Olympiad and know what is actually expected at first. Then they can use this knowledge base for the next year if they were to enroll in Olympiad to do well. So I think for P4, it's a good program itself. So I don't think it's too early. I think it's all right. And our programs are very, very structured based lah. So you can see, like, for example, photosynthesis and respiration, we go through the definitions, the basic, and then we build upon that. So it's like a new topic itself. So going at P4, they don't lose out. They in fact gain a lot of knowledge in order to actually even conquer their P5 and P6. So it's actually quite good. Are there homework weekly? Yeah. So me and Jarvis were actually discussing this in the morning. And I think for homework wise, right, I think one thing that we want to highlight to parents is that you can see that our notes are a lot. So if you can look at the concept paper itself, the concept paper itself is about 10 to 20 pages. So usually for 10 to 20 pages, you will take about 45 minutes during the class time. So they have 1 hour, 15 minutes of time to actually do the questions, okay, that we actually prepared for them, which is 40 to 50 questions. But of course, okay, as we go, we will try our best to go through most of the questions during the class. But of course, you must understand that due to limitations, sometimes some students might not be able to finish, right? So they will be able to take that back as homework and try it out. And for those people who enroll in this program, you will have me and Jervis' contact number directly. We will set up a WhatsApp group. You all can reach out to me directly for any questions or any queries that you all have. So in terms of homework weekly wise, it really depends on the student's aptitude. But usually what I realized is that there will be some questions where they have to take back home as homework to try out. And in the following week, or even in WhatsApp, we will actually look at it and also go through with the students directly as well, because of the plethora of notes and questions that we are providing lah. So definitely it will be a good gauge lah. Yeah. Can we explain more about the SPSO and RSO registration procedure? Okay, for the SPSO and RSO registration procedure, right, it's purely done by school. We are not in charge of the registration procedure itself. So the school, what they do is that they will look at the AL score of the student in terms of WAs and everything, and in terms of how they are, in terms of their learning aptitude, in terms of their progress in class, and the teachers will be the ones that will actually advocate for the students to actually be selected for this program to their HODs or to their higher ups in terms of management. But the key thing to note is that the teacher actually makes the decision in school. So as parents, as I said, if you all feel that your child should be strongly selected for this program, then you all should go and talk to your school teachers, ask them about this program and why is it that your child is not enrolled, and so on and so forth. They will have the answers to this question. But for registration procedure, it's probably done by the teachers. And the good news is there is no cap for the registration procedure. That means there is unlimited slots for students to actually join. But it depends on whether the teacher feels that the student is up for it. Yeah. Will the same course be offered once or more later during the year H2? Or is there a single offering per year? Currently, there is only a single offering per year. Yeah. Okay. So that's something for Karthik to take note. Okay. Let me see. Okay, yeah. So just now I had a parent that actually asked me about the online things, right? So I've already clarified, okay, with the MS support and also the idea is that you all will get emailed the materials to print. Okay, because one thing that I totally forgot about is that it's very hard for parents to go down to collect the materials, and it's very inconvenient for you all lah, in terms of going down to centers to collect. So I think one of the thing is that yeah, we will email the materials to you all, so you all don't need to worry about that. And you all can actually get your child to try it out as well in advance for the online classes. Okay, yeah. So I see that. Is there any more questions that you all want to ask? Anything? If we do not have printer at home, if we do not have printer at home, you all can use the soft copy first to annotate. Or as I'm going through, okay, we will have recorded sessions as well. So yeah, so you all can use that as a base lah, in order to actually annotate the PDFs. And if not, okay, when you all get a chance to print, then you all can take down those notes as well. How many students in online class? Online class usually don't really have a cap, but I think for maximum efficiency wise, I would feel that about currently there's about 20 plus, okay, and we aim to have about more than 30 or 40 lah. I think that is doable. Yeah. So currently now online classes don't have a cap yet, because we can take in as much students as we can. And we are trying our best lah to do so. Yeah. Okay. If you're willing to travel down to collect the materials, is it possible? Oh, I think that will be possible lah. It's just that we have to give a heads up to the center in order to print for you all. Is the physical class smaller? Okay, the physical class size is currently capped at 30 students. Currently capped at 30 students. We currently have about a few students lah, about 12 students itself. I realize that most of you all prefer the online compared to physical, but for parents here, I urge you all to join the physical, because I feel that a physical session is definitely better than an online session, in the sense that there is this sort of rapport with the students, and we are able to actually interact with them directly. So we can evaluate the students much more efficiently. And usually the takeaway for a physical lesson is definitely much better as compared to an online lesson itself lah. But of course, in terms of convenience-wise, online lesson tends to be better. But I strongly encourage parents to go for the physical one. I think it will be quite good and quite nice to interact with students, face to face. Yeah, it will build a good rapport, and they will be able to actually ask questions on the go as well, which is quite easy to manage as well. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, the online class will be recorded, so you can watch the recording at your own time if let's say your child is unable to attend. But again, please try to attend during the time slot, because sometimes students do have a lot of questions, and I think the only way that they can surface these questions is through a live session lah. So I think it's good for them to attend live, but of course we understand that students are very busy with many other activities. So of course the recording will be shared as well. Physical class only at Toa Payoh. Yeah, currently physical class is only at Toa Payoh. Okay, because number one, okay, we are limited by space. Number two, there's only 2 trainers. Yeah, and so that's why we started this. And just to take note, this is also a pioneer program lah. We are also seeing like how good this program will be, and also at the same time, we are also evaluating what our parents' needs are, and so on and so forth. And we felt that this Science Olympiad is a very good need for parents. So that's why we currently started off pioneering off with a physical session at CC, which is quite a central location. And I think a lot of parents would actually be quite open to that location. It's quite convenient to access. And that's why we have also an online session, just in case, if let's say the physical session is too much for you all, it's too early, then of course we have an online session the next day in the evening, just in case to fill that up, to fill the gap up. In terms of aligning with exam dates, SPSO falls right around the corner, but RSO is early April. Yeah, this is something that only Kartik, not only you, but a lot of parents have been asking me about. But the point that I want to make note to parents is this, that the point of this program was built upon the SPSO format. It wasn't built upon the RSO format. So the RSO is indeed earlier. But as I said earlier in my topics and in my topic coverage, in my worksheet coverage, right, I've already said that we have aligned the materials in such a way whereby I think RSO students can benefit, because the earlier topics I think are much more tested, and at the same time, in terms of concept-wise and in terms of explanations-wise, they have the material at least to revise. Okay, and of course, the most important thing is that they have access to me and Jervis, and at any time, at any point of the day, they can ask any questions. It doesn't need to be pertaining to that topic that they learned for that week. It can be anything, and we'll be able to answer that. So I think it's a win as well in terms of that. Yeah. Can share how to register for this course, or we'll put the link up. We have put the link up. Yeah, we're putting the link up in the chat. Yeah. Zoom online, is it live? Okay, Grace, Zoom online is live. Okay, me and Jervis will be there. Okay, and of course, most of the time, me and Jervis will be there, so we can actually answer your questions live as well. And as parents, you all can see in also. You all can see how we conduct the lesson. And if you all have any questions, you all can raise your questions and queries there. Can share how to register for this course. This one is done. And will this course benefit Venda SO and World Science Contest? Oh, this one, I think World Science Contest is okay, but SO is a bit more higher. So I think the knowledge point wise, we do cover certain things, but Venda SO tends to be a bit higher lah, in terms of their content. Yeah. Okay, and yeah, the registration link is already in the chat, okay, for Eng, if you need to actually know this. Okay. Yeah, any other questions that we need to answer? I've answered quite a few questions, but mostly they are administrative. Anybody have any queries about, how is it going to be covered or anything? Also, feel free to ask. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I see that not much questions. Okay. And it's quite a small crowd today lah. When is the exam? Okay, for the exam itself, okay, let me just show you all when the exam is so that you all know. Okay, let me see, where did I put it? Okay, so for the SPSO itself, you all can see down here. Okay, let me share my screen again. Okay, that basically for the SPSO, okay, it's in 19 May, which we still have a bit of time. And as I said, when we actually do the session, right, we even give mock tests just 2 days earlier before this, so that your kids are actually primed towards the type of questions that they're going to ask. They got 2 days to revise as well, okay, and based on our thing. And our mock exams, we will try our best, okay, to keep the rigor as comparable to SPSO, okay? So yeah. Okay, and for RSO itself, the dates are 2nd April and 30th April. As I say, it's slightly earlier, but just to remember that this format is mainly SPSO lah. Is RSO students can also join. They will still benefit because based on content-wise, it's quite similar, and Jervis and me have quite a huge content base. So we could actually share with these students as well. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions in terms of dates? I've answered. In terms of format, I've answered. Okay. So we hope that many parents will actually sign up for this, because I feel that it's a really very good value add. Just to remind you all, number one, you're getting supplementary notes, which I can tell you most schools, they don't have that. Okay, that detailed type of notes, I think only we have it, and we have crafted it in such a way whereby students can understand very easily. And our mind maps is something that is, we did it from scratch. So you can see that the quality of the notes will be definitely benefit the students for this program lah. What is the last date for the registration? Okay, for SPSO, the last date, from what I understand, is end March. Okay, for RSO, it should be already over already, if I'm not wrong. Can you go for round 2 slides? Okay, so just to be very clear about round 2 slides, parents, this year got only round 1. Round 2 is not available this year. Okay, you all can go and look up in the website. Okay, usually SPSO, the format changes every year. Sometimes have 2 rounds, sometimes don't have 2 rounds. But next year, I think might have a second round lah. I don't know. Okay, but for this year itself, it is only 1 round. So parents don't need to worry. If your child is in P5 and is currently in the program, they will only be selected for round 1. And then after that, the awards will be given out. Okay, but for round 2, just to give you all a brief overview, only the top 50 or the 1.5% will get into round 2. And then after that, they will do a filtering again to select the top 20, 12 to 20 students. And then from there, okay, they will actually enter the IMSO lah. Yeah, but of course lah, just saying that, okay, because it's IMSO, they also need the Math Olympiad background. Okay, just to be clear. Okay, and one thing that I forgot to mention, parents, if a child is actually selected for SPSO, high chance, okay, they will be actually selected for RSO as well because the time intervals vary. So if your child is only selected for RSO or SPSO, I don't know why. Maybe because it's due to the school or certain type of what they call regulations in the school. But usually, from my knowledge, based on my students, I know that if you're selected for SPSO, most likely you are also selected for RSO. So yeah, so usually it covers both base lah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Any other questions? So maybe I will open this until like maybe for another 5 minutes. Okay. For those people who have any other lingering questions lah, just to make sure. And I hope that you all are registering for the program because a lot of effort has been put into this program lah. Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So just for parents to know, okay, it's quite a tight schedule to do all this, and we have actually pulled it off. So I think I'm pretty sure by enrolling your child into this type of programs, okay, not only based on the Olympiad type of success, but I think that in terms of secondary school, they would actually also do well, and the notes are quite there for secondary school as well. Okay. Yeah. Any other questions that you all think that is relevant? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, let me just highlight also one more thing. Okay, for those parents, okay, that are wondering in terms of the course itself. Okay, so let me show you all the course. Okay, so give me a moment while I reshare back my screen. Okay, you all can see that basically it's 550 for 10 sessions. You all can see that one session is about $55 and 1 hour is about 27.50. And 27.50, to be very honest, the things that we are giving in terms of the notes, in terms of the questions, in terms of the review, the what they call it, the concept paper and the mind map. Okay, if you go to the outside market, I'm pretty sure they will charge more than that. Okay, in fact, an Olympiad book itself is already $15, and that just consists of questions. We are giving double the value, even not even double, less than double the value. We are giving much more. Yeah, so I think it's a good program to actually go for in terms of value wise for parents if you are able to spare that value. Yeah. Okay. So I see that there are not much questions. Oh yeah, Grace had asked one question. Let me see. If some weeks can't attend, yeah. So if they cannot attend the physical lesson, they can attend the Zoom lesson. That is okay. Yeah, it's just that let the center staff know and let us know as well so that we mentally can prepare like this student go for this and we can record it down as well. Okay, on our side. Can they attend both? This one, I think the materials covered will be the same. So attending both, I don't think it's a good idea. And usually for this price itself, you can only go for either the physical or the online. Yeah. And if you attend both, then you have to pay twice, most probably. So it's not wise to do so. But of course, okay, if your child feels that they need that reiteration, then maybe we can see case by case basis how it works here. Yeah. So also as MS support has replied also, okay, we will share the recordings. So actually there is no need for your child to go for the online lesson. They can on their leisure itself, they can actually look at the recordings and also take it from there. And also they can personally message us if that is a concern as well. Yeah. Okay. So any other questions? Okay. So if there are no other question, I think most likely let me just double check. Okay, if there's any other questions. I don't see any other questions as well. Okay. Thank you, okay, for attending this program. So for today itself, I think we can stop the program here. And I hope to see your kids for the program itself. Okay. And thank you for all parents for making the time for joining this program. Yeah. Thanks. Thanks all of you. Ken. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, okay. Lily has one more last question. How about P4? Yes, P4 can enroll for the program. Okay, just that we will take note there is a P4, so we will guide them as much as possible as we can. Okay, so thank you so much. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, so that's all for today. So I hope we answered all the questions and thanks a lot. Okay, hope to see you all there. Thanks.